From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Working to protect the right to protect these curls on the job, on the court, and in the classroom, not to mention from cancer. Plus, a week full of bills the LGBTQ community calls bullying. But first, water, not as common as we'd like, putting the force of state law behind efforts to refill the Ogallala Aquifer. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Kansans have been searching for a solution to the mining of the Ogallala Aquifer for decades now, and time's running out. Is the answer simply to write the demand into state law? David Condos of High Plains Public Radio takes a look.
The Kansas House Water Committee has endorsed a bill today that would force people in parts of western Kansas to do more to conserve the Ogallala Aquifer. Some western Kansas counties have already used up more than half of their underground water, nearly all of it going to irrigate crops. The bill would require groundwater districts to submit plans for reducing water use in areas of concern, such as where the aquifer's usable lifetime is 50 years or less. Representative Kenny Titus, a Manhattan Republican, voted to advance the measure.
This bill strikes a good balance between moving the state as a whole forward, protecting natural resources, but leaving the crux of this in local control.
Groundwater districts would have until July of next year to identify areas of concern and would need to submit conservation plans to the state by 2026. The bill now moves on to the full House for discussion.
Now, several folks have said dealing with water issues is a priority this session, including some folks sitting at this table. Our new Speaker of the Kansas House, Republican Representative Dan Hawkins of Wichita. Also joining us, we have Democrat Tom Sawyer, also a Wichita representative. And here by Zoom, Dr. Jay Steinmetz, a political analyst from Fort Hays State University. And I'm actually going to start with Dan. Usually if I have a Zoom guest and I introduce them last, I start with them. But Dan, I want to start with you. Speaker of the House, you set the agenda. You have said from the beginning, just as the governor has, that water is a priority.
Yeah, I say it's probably one of the top two items in the state, and actually across the nation there's a water problem. So for us, it was really important for us to keep the water committee intact and to find the right leadership to run it. And I think we did a really good job with that with Jim Minix, and of course we have Cindy Howerton from here in Wichita that's the vice chair. And I'm not sure, do you know who the...
Lindsey Vaughn.
Lindsey Vaughn. And Lindsey Vaughn's been very instrumental in that committee too. So we have three leaders that are doing very well at what they're doing. They've really been working right now on shoring up and ensuring the proper funding for the water, for our water resources. And that's really important. We haven't really funded that very well over the years. I guarantee you Tom can probably tell you a lot more about that because he's been here for 30 years, so he's seen it over the years. But
and you're our tax specialist.
And he is. But really getting that funding right is probably one of the most important things we can do. Then move on and start on to the solution to our water problems.
And talking about that funding, we do know that there is a surplus in the budget right now. Is it enough to cover what we need?
There's a lot of needs out there, but it's definitely enough for water. We're not talking about really huge amounts of money, but as Dan pointed out, over the years, we've talked about this problem forever, but we almost never fully fund the water plan. We put a water plan out there and then we don't fund it. And we've done different things over the years to try to help conserve water. We set up the groundwater management districts many years ago, and yet we have less water in the aquifer today than we did 10, 15 years ago. We're not making progress. So the bill passed Thursday. I think it's a big deal. I think it was very, very important, the work the committee did. It's important we follow up on this. I mean, it is and I think it shows how things have changed. Or people realize what a big issue it is. I mean, we've talked about water, but we never really fund it. We kind of give it lip service. Now I think people are serious about it. We passed a serious bill out of committee. That's a big deal.
And I think it passed out with all but one vote.
Yeah.
I think it was just one.
Yeah, very bipartisan bill and a lot of support, strong support, which is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now, Jay, you're smack in the middle of one of the areas most hit by this water shortage. Are you hearing the same urgency from folks who live in that area that we're hearing from state lawmakers now?
Oh, yeah, certainly. In fact, Hayes and Ellis County has been really a leader in terms of conservation efforts and looking at protecting water sources. I think the comment about the bill being a good balance is really an important one as well. We do have a responsibility to protect the environment, to protect our resources, but local control has a long history in Kansas. And in this issue in particular, I think we've seen a lot of success in localities taking the lead and figuring out how to conserve water. Ellis County and Hayes has been a leader in the state in terms of that. So yeah, I think it's a win-win. I think it's a bill that's popular. It's popular for a number of reasons. It kind of fits with the political perspective of the state in terms of local control, and it deals with substantially deals with an issue that really needs some statewide attention, and that's water. So yeah.
Well, and talking about statewide attention there, Jay, we're talking about an issue where the situation in Hayes, very different from Wichita, extremely different from Kansas City and Johnson County. We've got to get all of these folks at the table to agree on something.
Yeah, exactly. And, out here in Western Kansas, it's heavy agriculture. There are a lot of water needs, but it has a different level of impact out here and a different level of visibility in terms of the policy. It's a policy issue, water that's just a lot more salient. So there has always been, I think, in Kansas, and this is one of the challenges, getting Eastern Kansas and Wichita area to care about those rural issues and those issues out here in Western Kansas that may not impact them as much as it does out here, but there's a possibility that increasingly it will impact them if they're not paying attention now. If we don't get on these kinds of issues early on to sort of mitigate against the negative consequences of it. So it's important that we look to Western Kansas and some of these issues, see what kind of solutions have been dealt with out here, and see if we can get more statewide visibility for it and more attention to it in Topeka.
Well, and we touched on this a little bit last week, Dan, where we've got this move where we've got more lawmakers now from urban areas, fewer from rural areas. The power balance has shifted a little bit. Does that kind of change the dynamics of trying to find the solution in this?
I don't really think so at all. If you look at our urban areas, they're just as concerned about water as what the rural areas are. And Wichita is one of them, but many cities draw their water from lakes. And the lakes are silting over. There are several lakes in crisis situations right now. And so the water issue is just, when I went across the state over this last fall, that was the single issue that every place I went, they talked about. Because we take for granted our resources. We all do. Yeah. But water is that one life-sustaining element that we have to have. We have to have water, that resource that we have to have. And so it's truly important across the board. And really that's the reason why we set the committee up the way we did. Representative Jim Minix from Scott City is truly a pragmatic person that's going to bring every single stakeholder from across the state in. He'll listen to them all. He knows it's not just a rural problem, it's an urban problem also. Having Cindy Howerton and Lindsey Vaughn on there just adds to that. And they're all passionate. That, believe it or not, even though those two are urban, they're very passionate about the water issue. So I think we've got the right mix on there, and they're really going to get something done.
And it's not even just the amount of water, the sources, but I've noticed lately it seems like we're seeing more and more of these boil water oil orders coming from the KDHE because pipe systems are breaking down. They're getting old.
It's certainly been a problem in Wichita. We know about that.
Yeah.
No, but really the water issue is a statewide issue. I think most people in the state now realize how important it is, and it affects all of us. And I'm glad to see the committee because, and like I said, that was a big deal, getting the committee to buy in that, because there's a lot of people tried to work on this issue over the years and haven't been able to get it done. So this really was a big deal, what they passing a bill out Thursday.
Okay.
Well, and that's one thing that happened last 2 years really, was our chairman kind of tried to do it on his own. Instead of bringing in all of those stakeholders, it fell flat. It really did.
All right. Well, here's crossing our fingers we get a solution by the end of the session. Well, from transgender athletes to gender reassignment surgery, state lawmakers took up a slate of bills this week affecting the LGBTQ community. But why all of them in the same week?
serves to codify stigma and discrimination against transgender people.
There's a difference between the strength of biological men and biological females.
They came to talk about sports and gender reassignment surgeries.
I am left alone with a ruined endocrine system, sexual dysfunction, and chronic pain.
When I took the first shot, the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders.
They came from every corner of Kansas and from out of state.
Can you tell me where in Kansas you've received your transitioning or gender affirming care?
I'm not from Kansas, I'm from California.
Oh, okay.
This happened in North Carolina.
The hearings so far, just part of the transgender and LGBTQ bills on the agenda this week, starting with proposed bans on transgender athletes in girls' sports and on gender reaffirming surgery and hormone treatments for Kansas minors.
Because I started so young, I don't know if I'll be able to birth children, but I know for sure that I will never have the choice to breastfeed any of my children as an adult.
My doctors removed my healthy breasts, deeming me healthy enough to consent to that, but not to liposuction.
Over the last 7 years of living as a proud transgender man, the beauty and joy of being who I am has not wavered.
With more on the schedule, such as preventing cities and counties from passing non-discrimination ordinances that are stricter than the states, which doesn't currently protect LGBTQ Kansans, or creating what supporters call a Women's Bill of Rights that would ban transgender women from designated areas in domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, locker rooms, etc.
It's an issue that conservatives see as motivating voters. It's an issue that they see as really distinguishing themselves.
And political analyst Dr. Russell Arbin-Fox says scheduling all of them in the same week makes sense when several of the witnesses are coming from out of state, like Chloe Cole and Prisha Mosley, who both testify on bills like these around the country.
How often is that person going to be able to, how often are they going to be able to afford to fly that person out? So, it makes sense for them to bundle them.
The question that remains to be answered, will any of these bills survive a veto from Governor Kelly, or even a legal challenge from groups like the ACLU? And Jay, I'm going to start with you on this one. Obviously, we had the opinion there from one political analyst. Do you kind of agree with him? Are there other strands that you see for why we would have all of these bills in 1 week?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the rationale is there in the sense of, out-of-state voices or people traveling to be a part of the conversation on this one. I don't see any other rationale in particular, other than, there are clearly political motivations for this. It was mentioned in that piece that you had there that, it's certainly an issue that's going to motivate conservative voters. Whether or not it makes for good policy is a different question. And that's always been tension in politics, right? Some things might motivate voters and be attractive visibly, but is it going to make for good policy? I've spoken to a number of Republicans in the state legislature who are concerned with some of the bills in terms of their constitutionality, et cetera, et cetera. It's an important conversation to have. And I think that there's a lot of substance to the policy debate around the issue, but making sure that it becomes about substantive policy and less about sort of the theatrics of politics or, mobilizing voters on issues where, policy is not going to follow. We got to have that kind of conversation. So it's a difficult topic. It's an important one. And I think that there's always a concern about equal protection and due process and ensuring equality amongst Kansans. That's the baseline that we all agree on. Where we go from there and what kind of shape these policies take in either direction, that's where the conversation becomes really important.
And talking about that, Dan, Speaker, I'm going to come to you on this. Part of your job is holding together kind of two different wings of a party that form a supermajority, a moderate wing and a conservative wing. Most of these bills coming from the more conservative wing. How do you hold that together in these sticky situations?
Well, it's not quite as tough as it was in the past because there's not much of a moderate wing. I think Tom would agree with me on the Republican side of the aisle. There's not very many left. The last couple of elections have changed that. And quite frankly, if you look at this last election, we had actually some very good moderates who I really thought were great people, and they voted against the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, and that's what got them. There's at least 4 of them that I know that lost their races because of that. So, of course, they were replaced with more conservative legislators. But, really, I don't think it's just all a partisan issue. I think if you talk to some Democrats, there's going to be some Democrats that feel the fairness in women's sports is an issue that's just it truly needs to be brought out. It was last year, it is again this year. When you hear stories, and probably Riley Gaines is the biggest story out there, who had worked her whole life, started swimming at 4. Her senior year, she's set to be a national champion. A male who had swam as a male for 3 years of college changes to a female, comes over and wipes everybody out. That's just not fair. I mean, it's really truly a fairness. Men are built different than women, and so it's not always a fair thing for that to happen. In addition, some of the things that you'll hear out there, a trans person sharing a bathroom with women, sometimes that really unnerves some women. We experienced that last year. We had a Republican on our side that made a big deal about, one of our members. So, there's a lot of different feelings out there, but I really think, I haven't really followed all these others. Fairness in women's sports is really the only one that I can talk about. I didn't even know there was anything on the Senate side, because we don't really pay attention to the Senate until it gets to us, do we, Tom?
Right. No,
So it was kind of surprising, some of the stuff that's going on in the Senate, because I really haven't paid attention to that.
Now, I will insert, to be fair, Riley Gaines was not just beat by Leah Thomas, but also by several other swimmers who meet the traditional definition of females. So
yes, but she also had she had a chance. I mean, she tied for that one with Leah Thomas. So that's, and then they flipped the coin or something and decided Leah Thomas won it. So, yeah.
And of course, that's a college in Kentucky or some other state. I mean, it's not Kansas at all. In Kansas, we have two transgender athletes. Apparently, they're not even very good. So, but the reality is, to me, the Kansas High School Athletic Association, this is their purview. They're handling the situation, and they should. I think we've got bigger issues to talk about in the legislature, like taxes, the water issue, the budget, several things that we ought to be focusing on, and we shouldn't be spending a lot of time on. And I didn't know about a lot of these other transitions that were over there. The Senate, my gosh, they sound real busy but with this stuff. But I really do think we should concentrate on the big issues that affect all Kansas, and let the Kansas High School Athletic Association do their job and take care of that issue.
Okay, Jay, you had a thought?
Yeah, just echoing both comments. I think the impact in terms of Kansas really isn't there in terms of the actual numbers of individuals and the importance of this issue. But to echo the first speaker as well, a comment, I agree that in many ways, this issue is not exactly very partisan. In my opinion, I don't think it's a winning issue for Democrats really at all. And I think that there's a lot of moderate Democrats who have some concern about how far this issue is going to go in terms of the more identity politics left, advocates of this issue. So in an electoral sense, I'm not so sure that this is a winning issue for Democrats. And I think a lot of Democrats understand that and want to avoid it to some degree. But also at the same time, echoing the other's comment there, I think there's a legitimate question about what kind of impact this is. Again, the visibility is very high, but is this a policy issue that has the same substantive importance and meaning as some of the other things like water, like taxes, the things that we're talking about as well?
Not to mention like fentanyl. Law enforcement says the fentanyl epidemic continues to get worse across Kansas, sharing updated numbers on busts and overdose deaths with lawmakers this week. The state lawmakers heard from law enforcement Tuesday on a bill that would double the possible sentence for anyone caught making fentanyl. just one of many proposals before lawmakers to help slow or end the ongoing epidemic of overdose deaths. Wichita police told lawmakers Tuesday afternoon that fentanyl overdose deaths continue to climb. They expect the total from last year to top the 160-plus deaths in 2021, but say the coroner in Sedgwick County still has more than 250 autopsies to complete from last year. As of September of last year, the KDHE says Kansas saw a 73.5% increase in overdose deaths from 2011 to 2020. Meanwhile, officers say the number of fentanyl busts is also still rising.
In 2022, our drug enforcement units seized over 240,000 suspected fentanyl pills, and last month alone, we seized over 30,000 pills.
Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter told lawmakers his officers are finding more than just pills now. They're also finding fentanyl powder laced in everything from marijuana to heroin. And it only takes as much fentanyl as a grain of rice or less to kill someone, which is why groups like Safe Streets Wichita are giving out free naloxone doses. It's a medicine that rapidly reverses an opioid overdose. Safe Streets will be out again this Saturday, distributing the antidote at 3 locations. Meanwhile, advocates are again asking state lawmakers to make testing strips for both fentanyl and the date rape drug legal and freely accessible. During a hearing Thursday, 2 mothers who'd lost children to fentanyl begged lawmakers to make the change, saying, "I'm here as a mother that has had the worst thing imaginable taken from her, a child that I created, my chance to be a grandmother someday." And this is an issue. We've done an entire episode of Kansas Week on this. It is devastating to families and individual Kansans. And every family that I've spoken with that has lost somebody to a fentanyl overdose has begged for legalization of the fentanyl test strips. What's the holdup, guys?
Well, the House, we agree, actually. We passed a bipartisan bill last year out of the House. It got hung up in the Senate, unfortunately. Hopefully this year we can get it done, because it has to happen. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is a big issue. It's affecting a lot of families, and test strips should not be illegal.
No, and I would agree with Tom, and we did pass one. Stephen Owens, the chair of Corrections and Juvenile Justice, has been a champion for this issue. He's worked hard again this year to get a bill out, and we will see a bill before we're done. I think it's important to note, although we need fentanyl strips out there, I do agree with the fact that they did increase the fine, or the penalty, I should say, because we really don't want to make it to where we get a lot more drugs. I mean, if you have fentanyl strips and you don't have something to to slow down the use of drugs, I mean, what have we done? But you do need those fentanyl strips, because there's all these drugs coming in that are laced with fentanyl and nobody knows about it. And then it kills them. So it is important that we do this. And Tom and I actually were very supportive last year of getting this out. We did get it out, and it did get hung up in the Senate. So election years do funny things.
Yeah.
Senate does some odd things sometimes too. Well, it's a story we've seen before, talking about the Senate. A bill introduced again and again over the last few years, but this year it has more urgency behind it, as studies show new dangers behind the means some Kansans use to avoid violating dress codes that ban protective, traditionally African-American hairstyles.
Right now, this bill is in the Senate, Fed, and State Committee. A hearing date has not been set, but supporters say it could happen soon. They're expecting to get an update in the coming week. Now, I did speak with Michelle Watley, who spent years championing this bill here at the State House. She says one of the obstacles has been educating lawmakers on why protections for natural hairstyles need to be established.
I think it needs to be in statute because of the history of our country and the rules that we've had in place, again, whether conscious or unconscious, that have perpetuated racism by proxy. It's a rule that on its surface looks like it applies to everyone, but because there's only one group of people wearing these hairstyles, codifying it in law allows employers to be proactive.
And this bill was first introduced in 2019 by Wichita Senator Oletha Faust-Godot. She's brought it back again this year with the hope that lawmakers will move it forward. And supporters say one of the main roadblocks is how the proposal would protect people who have to wear specific hairstyles for work, like at construction sites, for example. And one of the solutions they're looking at is adding language to the bill to address that issue. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And Jay, I'm going to start with you on this one. So far, Senator Aletha Fausto introducing this bill in the Senate. It's not made it out of committee a single time. She's done it 3 times there. This year, they're trying in the House. How does that change the dynamics, the possibility of this bill making it through?
Honestly, I don't know, because I don't know anything about this bill. I have not heard about it, so I can't really speak to that at all. And I didn't really hear the news report. I think it may change the dynamic, just in the sense that you have a different committee dynamic, and you obviously have a different partisan dynamic in the House. But I can't really speak to this bill. I don't know much about it.
Okay, well, guys, I know that you don't necessarily follow every single bill until it actually gets kicked out to the House floor. But in this case, one thing that we learned from this hearing, or that I learned from watching this hearing, since you guys weren't in it, is that there's now knowledge that the main way most African American women especially get around these dress codes is by chemically straightening their hair. And we've now learned that the chemicals that they use increase the rate of breast cancer and uterine cancer by as much as 83%. That kind of, to me, lends a little bit of urgency to this.
Well, I would say we don't support discrimination in any way. So if there's workplace discrimination going on just because of your hair, that's really unfortunate. This is one of those issues, just like your other guest. I don't know a whole lot about it. It's not something I've paid attention to. So I've got to do some studying on it, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. I will say, I think it's actually, I know just a tiny bit, just because my seatmate has been very involved with it, Clayton.
Yeah.
She introduced it for Aletha in the House.
In the House. And so I've heard a little bit, and it is interesting, because, again, it's been an issue that's been on the Senate side, and as he says, we don't really pay, it never got out of the Senate, so we've not really had a House discussion on it. But I do think the way we work in the House and the way we've passed a number of bipartisan bills. We had sports betting last year. We talked about the fentanyl. We've had several things we've been able to come together. I think that might increase the chance. If we could get out of the House, that might send it to the Senate. Maybe we'd get a chance of getting it passed. Because,
we got 400 bills out there that's been introduced, and we'll probably have 80 to 100 on the floor by the time we finish. So there's 75% of the bills that'll never hit the floor. So.
Well, and part of my job is making sure that even lawmakers are aware of some of the issues that are coming up. So I have now informed you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jay, Dan, and Tom, for joining me. I hope that you guys have enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the discussion with you online. You can find us on social media. My handle is Pilar Pedraza TV on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. For now, stay safe and have a great week.